storied financier in the real estate debt markets, and he's also currently working with a group of people who have put together kind of a vehicle for distressed, and he's going to tell us about where he sees the real estate market, and also, you know, where he sees distressed markets, because he sees a lot of things in the credit environment that we don't see. So Jeff, and again, tell us where you are, Jeff, because I know sometimes you're in Florida, sometimes you're in New York. Where are you? And give yourself the appropriate introduction. So thanks so much.
Well, you're quite welcome. One might say I'm a nomad, but I happen to be in Florida at the moment. And I was in New York City for the majority of what's gone down here. And I'm going to come at this really a little bit different. I'm not that technical. I don't have charts, but really want to talk about the macro environment and what I see. But first, let me tell you who I am and what I do. You hit it a bit. I've had a few different companies. Most recent is Candor Capital Partners, where I specialized in doing short-term real estate finance, categoric bridge loans. Disparaging term would be hard money lending, which I don't really like to go to. And the companies were Mercury Capital and Paradigm, now Candor. And I'm on the board of another company that I do stuff with called York Funding. And they all have different niches as to what they do. York is in the fix and flip space. And my recent companies is that I would do, you know, short-term one-year bullet loans, anywhere from $1 million up to $20 million. And, you know, on a macro level, it's a business that's changed a lot over the years. And I'll talk about what's happening now, but just have a basis in that there's so much money chasing. Wall Street's always the tail that wags the dog. And, you know, when Wall Street got involved and started funding a lot of different funds out there to go into this business, it changed it a lot. I've had the red flag up for the private lending markets for quite a while, because what I've seen is a degree of aggressiveness from a loan to value perspective. So the loan to values have gone much higher for a lot less. You know, the rates have dropped. People are chasing the same deals and they're bidding them up and putting too much money out. That's dangerous, you know, and to the expression, history has a tendency to repeat itself, because we've seen cycles and things change previously, like 2008 with, you know, all the insanity that transpired then. My other side of that business, or being in the bridge lending business, is I'm also sit on the board of directors of Signature Bank in New York City, and have so for 15 years. So I sort of have an aperture to, you know, like all the things going on in the lending markets, and, you know, have great sensitivity to what's happening. So what is happening? And, you know, how bad is what's transpired going to be? Well, I wish I had the crystal ball to give you a straight answer. I actually was on the phone the other day with the head of credit at Signature discussing, you know, our portfolio and what we see. And metaphorically, I would describe where we are currently as beginning of inning 2 of the baseball game, because everything that's transpired and taken place because of what we've just gone through with COVID is a domino effect. Now, if you start really thinking about what's happened and you go under the hood, and, you know, it's obvious that, you know, businesses have been disrupted and shut down. But in many cases, these businesses are not going to survive. If you were to take a guess of how many restaurants in New York City you think would close, are going to close, if it's 50%, that's going to be a low number. Literally half the restaurants will not sustain. You cannot stay in business in a restaurant business where you can only have 50% seating capacity. Many of these restaurants have shut down and aren't reopening, sadly. You know, retail's been a problem for a long time for the obvious reasons, disintermediation. Now even more severe, more impacted, because people are just not going into stores. Yesterday I went to Brickell City Center. I walked around the mall. I was stunned. Not that it's ever really busy. I may have seen 10 people in a giant mall. People are afraid to go out. And so the psychology is a very, very big thing. We can look at charts and we can look at statistics, but the way people are thinking and the fear factor is at a very high level for a lot of people, some people more so than others. And that translates into what happens in business and where things are going. I do all sorts of different types of loans. And, you know, by example, to give you a sense, I have a bridge loan that I did for $5.5 million on an asset in Orlando, and it was a Hyatt development. Great guys, serious players in the market, and, you know, clear. Then they paid like the clock. It hasn't been built yet. There's, you know, everything got stalled. And in dealing with them, being the lender, they came to me and said, we can't make payments now. And at first I said, well, guys, you were making payments with a non-income producing asset. How come? And they said, well, all of our hotels are shut down and we literally have no revenue. And I sort of knew the answer, and I knew what, you know, they were going to say to me. And, you know, so literally their entire business is generating no revenue. And all the lenders really have to step up, and, you know, to the extent that they can. So we do these things called deferrals. So I've cut a deal with them where I'm extending their loan, and I'm also giving them an interest deferral, hopefully based upon that they're going to resurrect. Hotels in New York maybe start opening in July. Some are open, but the majority, a lot are not. And many of those are going to go out of business. Think about that business. Who's going to come to New York City to stay in hotels? Where's the international travel? It's going to take a long, long time. How long can companies sustain themselves? There was a recent prediction that of the 6 million businesses that are out there in this country, 1 million of them are going to go bankrupt. At a discussion on the Signature Bank level, we're starting to see a lot of bankruptcies. And not that that's shocking, just pick up the newspaper. You know, name retailers, all different types of companies are really not able to sustain and are not going to be around. So, you know, projections and statistics, we really don't even know. There was an article the other day in the Wall Street Journal that said the banking industry is going to take a $700 billion hit because of this. But because of what? How long is this going to be? And what happens if it resurrects again? And how long will that sustain the pain where all these businesses are going out of business? So if you sit back, and I've, you know, spoke to, you know, a lot of different people that are borrowing money, and, you know, companies like, I have a good friend who's got the largest web-based prom company, prom dresses, big name, zero business, done. When are people going to start going to proms again? Clearly there were no proms this year. Will it happen next year? The theater district in New York City, probably not opening, from what I understand, till March. Now, fortunately, these people have deep pockets they can sustain, but some that don't are not going to get there. So what does that really mean? So how does all this play out? And where does this all create opportunities? See, I'm an entrepreneur and a salesman, but I'm really an entrepreneur. And I run around and always have looked for transactions that I find compelling, that make sense. And I've got my distress hat on, and it's coming. And to the extent of how much will clearly depend on the severity of how long this plays out. Up to this period of time, lenders that had loans that were not paying, some of them would sell them, but they would sell them at par, which means they're selling them at their principal balance. They weren't taking haircuts. I remember earlier on, years and years ago, where you were able to buy things, you know, really, really inexpensively, way below par. In 2008, 2009, when the whole economy got crushed, I mean, values, you know, obviously changed significantly, but there was a lot of opportunity to buy distress. So the question becomes, the distress market's coming. How much of a hit will the lenders take? Where are the opportunities? And then the next question, what about values? Are values going to change? And all these things are moving targets, so it becomes a little tricky to go find and get things. We are still in such an early stage of where the opportunities are that the banks and the lenders have not come forth to really vomit up what they have to get rid of. They really have to get rid of these assets. They're under, you know, strict governance, you know, in terms of maintaining ratios as well as performing assets. Then there are levered funds out there that have stuff that they can't sustain. They're going to start selling, and you're going to start seeing stuff. So at this point, I'm starting to see some things, and I have a portfolio I'm looking at from a small bank that just wants out. I believe down here in Florida that could be bought for less than par. Tomorrow I have a meeting, you know, in a different sector of the lending business called the merchant cash advance business. Now, for those of you that don't know what that is, it's a very risky business in that you lend to merchants based upon their balances. There's no direct collateral, and it's a very hands-on business. It's also a very lucrative business in terms of rate of return, but also a very high default business. I'm looking at a $175 million portfolio of what's left in this portfolio for a company that's been in bankruptcy. Now, they've been in bankruptcy for quite a while, and my gut and what I think is that this could be bought for a penny on the dollar. 1 cent on the dollar. And tomorrow I have a meeting with a team that we're analyzing it to determine whether, in fact, I want to go out and buy this. A lot of work, and it's going to cost a bunch of money to deal with it, but that's going to create, very interesting opportunities. That sector, that end of the business is getting crushed. You think about all the businesses out there that borrow money that way, and they're not doing business. So what happens? The lenders are going to wind up getting back a ton of that paper.
Hey,
So,
Jeff, I know you have notes and everything else in your preparation, but I just want to talk to you about, so you talked about merchant cash advance, and we spoke about this the other day where we had a restaurant firm that was lending to urban restaurants merchant cash advance, and they had 90% defaults in March, and the remainder defaulted in April. So when you see this and you compare it to 2009, 2010, do you think that this is going to be a longer cycle to work out of, or is the trowel going to be deeper? Maybe you can, because I think you discussed the ripple effect of all of this, right? I mean, there's ripples, as you said. I mean, who would think an internet business would be vulnerable? But when you're selling prom dresses, sure, you're vulnerable, right? I mean, there's no homecoming outfits either going to be sold, I suppose, right? So
it clearly, I mean, they built a huge business, but it was all internet based. But it was a sector of business that there is no business now.
Exactly, right. So I'm just trying to, what is your feeling about how long it's going to be versus, I mean, as you said, we're still in the early innings. I mean, if there's a second wave, it could be bad. But relative to what you feel, because you've been, although you're a real young guy, you've been in the business for a long time. So
I do have gray hair. My youth, I still have some youth, but it's not as youthful as it used to be. But I still feel very young. Look, I don't have a crystal ball, and nor does anybody else. And the reality is, part of it is, obviously, they come up with a vaccination that really is effective, that's accepted, that works. When that's going to happen is going to be a panacea that's going to change perception. But when is that going to happen? Everyone has conjectures, and everyone has an opinion. And, who can you trust? The reality is nobody knows. If, in fact, things are getting worse. I mean, every day we're hearing that the infection or the COVID virus is spreading. It's big. The numbers are getting larger and larger. To the extent of deaths, we're up to 128,000 deaths. They're now saying, we can project 200,000 deaths. But the fear that people have, I have people that I know. I have an investor, by example, who I've done a lot with me, very successful guy, and he's got a beautiful house in Sag Harbor. And I happened to be in Sag Harbor a few weeks ago, and he called me. I just finished writing my third book, and he was calling me about my book, And he says to me, and I said, "Oh, Mike, are you out at your house in Sag Harbor?" He said, "No." I said, "Where are you?" He said, "Oh, I'm in my apartment in the state." I said, "Why aren't you in your house? I mean, why won't you, I am not leaving my apartment." He said, "Oh," I said, "I only go downstairs and get my mail. I put on my mask, I put on my gloves, I go to the mailbox with a pair of pliers, I take my mail out of the mailbox, put it in a plastic bag, go upstairs, derobe, take all my clothes off that I wore to go get my mail, throw them in the washer dryer, and then I spray the mail and open it with my gloves on." Now, that's a little extreme, and maybe it's even not a little extreme, maybe it's very extreme. I know people that have not left their apartment do this entire thing. The psychology or the fear of this is even more impactful than even the economic result, because people are really scared, especially older people. Obviously the younger people aren't as affected because for them, they're non-symptomatic, but they're also carriers and they spread it. So how long is this going to last? How pervasive is it? This is the worst thing economically that I think's happened to us. 2008, 2009, bank collapse, Wall Street induced, all the things they did, destroying the banking world. That was obviously horrible, and we know what that caused. Unfortunately, our banking world is a lot stronger now, and some banks are actually doing well, even though they're going to take hits because of defaults. But how long? This is pervasive across every business. This is pervasive the way we live. This, if you think back about the changes that come from things like this, think about when 9/11 happened. What were the changes? Security. Everything. You couldn't go into a building without showing your identification. Going to the airport. How much is this going to change our lives? What's going to become the modality for operations? I was talking to a matrimonial attorney, friend of mine yesterday, who is in the city, went down in Florida, went to her office. They allow 2 people in the office. And they got to take your temperature. You got to get sprayed. You can't be near anybody else. The other person has to be on the other side. There's all these rules that this person has to live up to go to their office. How long is that going to change until that changes? When is there going to be a sense of comfort to be around people? What is that going to do to business? What is that going to do to defaults?
Great, Jeff. So lots of questions from the audience. One is, are you too early to be in distress mode? Is this a falling knife period? That's number one. And I wanted to get to another question here, which is, aren't banks under pressure to extend and pretend? Won't it take a while until real capitulation takes place? And also, where does it leave factoring and asset-based financing? I mean, we experienced this in 2009, right? Huge hedge funds that were doing factoring all went under, right? So talk about that.
Well, look, first, let's talk about lend and pretend. There are different lenders and different degree of aggressiveness. I'll speak, to Signature is an amazing lender. They don't have a lot of defaults. They really are smart. They were not in the development business. If you're a lender that's been in the development business, major high rises, you're lending the money. Look what's happened to the condo market in New York. Look what's happening in terms of activity. These loans come due. You're now in default technically, and maybe not even technically. That's a real problem. So what's value? What is going to be the value of these properties? What's condos going to be selling for? I just sold a distressed condo for about $700 a foot in New York City because I had to get out of it. So where does this all go? So it creates a multiplier effect. So it really comes down to your portfolio and your degree of aggressiveness. Certain lenders are much more aggressive, and as such are going to have much more pain. But the exact modality, how it plays out, is very hard to determine because, again, we don't know how long this is going to last. And then you got to realize that they have the feds on them. They're regulated. So when you're not in compliance in terms of ratios and covenant defaults, you will start falling in terms of where you have to be in the pecking order. Hence, because of what transpired in 2008, it's a much more onerous environment to be regulated, because back then there was, the regulations were somewhat lax, and that's a euphemism. So all these things are clear that it's going to get a lot worse. There's going to be a lot of stuff out there, and how do you take advantage of it? Look, I just did a bridge loan where I was a small bridge loan, but it was I put up $1 million and I took an $8 million mortgage as collateral in the first position. The property's worth probably about $11 million. It was a no-brainer loan, and I have the mortgage as collateral. There'll be stuff out there that you got to find. You just got to be very selective and not take really big risks. The problem is there's so much money chasing. Money always chases, and when money chases, it overpays and causes bad decisions. And unfortunately, there's tons of money. Why is the stock market flying now? You tell me ratios and stuff. There's no rate of return. There's tons of money sitting out there, and the money goes flying back into the markets. Yes, and we understand the government stepped in and did all they did, and Trump, it blew more air in the balloon to drive people to go back into the market, and that's a good thing. But where are the fundamentals? The reality, all these companies are in severe stress. Yet their stocks are flying. There's just money rushing in. So there used to be a thing called basis. There used to be something called fundamentals. And if you look at the fundamentals of what's going on now, the real core fundamentals, we have some real problems, and we just don't know how long it's going to last. So each one of these types of sectors of lending or investing are at risk. At least that's my perspective.
Jeff, we got about 3-4 more minutes left, but so I just want to really just get a feel for you. So I know you're looking at a lot of distressed credit. Is most of that in real estate or outside? Are you looking at any private equity, or give us a feel for where you intend to be active, when you think you're going to start pulling some triggers, et cetera? Is that going to be in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months?
So my breadth is a little wide. I also own a broker dealer, investment banking firm. So I occasionally get involved in investment banking transactions. About to do something now that I really like. Picking spots. I did a bridge loan that was a no-brainer. I've got some assets here with a bank that I'm really looking at hard. I'm going to look at this merchant cash advance thing at a penny. Probably about a penny and a half to run it, to do it. If I can really feel at the end of the day, it comes out 7-8 cents, it's a deal that I would do. I've got a lot of people that do stuff with me, and I got a lot of smart people around me. So the key thing is always about your team. So I have all these people that have different skill sets from an analytic perspective that we look at things, and we're just being very, very careful. I've done a bunch of stuff in the triple net area on the real estate side, on the acquisitions. Triple nets now, the cap rates are going up. So I'm looking at them if I feel comfortable with the credit, but and the tenant. So it's hard, but then of course it was never easy. So if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So,
Great.
you
So,
know,
and you and your investor group, you think that you've got, I mean, you've got plenty of runway at this point. I mean, it's just going to be a matter of picking your spots.
and I think hard about what those spots are, should be, and will be. And
I've got 2 more minutes, but I just have one more question, which is, so we get a lot of venture that comes to us, and I'm telling people, because what happened in 2009 and 2010 is that people really stopped looking at venture because everything was distressed. Everybody's like, well, if I can buy an asset that's at a 50 or 75% discount, it's going to come back. Why wouldn't I, right? Rather than invest in venture where I don't know what the outcome's going to be. So any thoughts? I mean, do you think the duration of this is going to be pretty long, or
well, let's put it this way. All the big boys now are raising billions of dollars for distressed funds. I've heard it across the street. They've all put, pulling in money, a billion here, a billion. All the big guys, 2 billion, because they're all seeing it. They're all sensing it, and they know that there's going to be a ton of distress. I think, unfortunately, that this is more protracted than, some people that are very optimistic. I hope I'm wrong. I hope there's a panacea in terms of an injection that this goes away. But the fear factor, that has to happen to take the fear out. And the fear factor amongst people, I see it all around me. I'm constantly getting lectures from people. Wear a mask, wear a mask. And I wear a mask when I go into a supermarket. I walk down the street. I don't want to wear a mask. I'm not near people. I stay far away. But some people, like, you're not wearing a mask.
I mean, it's actually just a vicious cycle, because I mean, there's the ripple that we're talking about from economics, but there's also like a psychological ripple that you're talking about,
and that's huge. And that is huge. That is so huge. Because at the end of the day, if you live in fear, then you're paralyzed. And there are a lot of people that really are paralyzed. So look, I think that I'm always trying to be enthusiastic. I'm always positive. I'm out there talking to a lot of people. I love meeting new people. I love hearing ideas. And the thing is, you got to look at a lot of stuff and talk to a lot of people to find things that make sense. Now it's even a little more challenging in light of certain light. It's much more challenging.
And it's tough to go out there and shake hands unless you're bringing lots of Purell. So listen, Jeff, this is really great stuff. And I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to speak to us.
My pleasure.
Your video will be available to people, and people will, I'm sure, ask you to get more information from you and contact you. You're in a great segment to be in right now, because I think the pathway for distress is a good 4 or 5 years.
Just one last thing. My first book that I wrote is called One Phone Call Away: Secrets of the Master Networker. I'm one phone call away from anybody that'd like to talk to me or brainstorm or has ideas or might be interested in some of the things I'm seeing out there. So please reach out. I look forward to meeting anyone that'd like to meet me.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually really lucky, because I consider you to be a great networker, and we're lucky to have Jeff Berman out of California, who's a fantastic Lerman out of who's a fantastic networker, and then of course Sean Coe, who knows everybody and anybody in the next generation family office space. So Jeff, listen, again, thanks so much, and we'll be seeing you again in the future. So Brian and Sean, can we get you guys to introduce yourselves and talk about your topic? Thanks so much.
Sure. How are you, everyone?